All right, well, hello everyone. My name is Eric Peyton. I'm the Connections Coordinator here at Hope, and that means I get to work with our network of small groups. We've got somewhere around 500-ish small groups, not counting the ones in this room, here at the West Des Moines campus. And so I get to work with a bunch of those groups and those leaders, and so... we're here at Men of Hope on Wednesday mornings. We're starting this new series called Stories of Faith Made Real. And in this series, we're going to be looking about ways that God is showing up in different people's lives. And you're going to hear from, 6 or 8 different people about how God is really showing up in their lives. Because I think for me personally, it's helpful to hear stories from other people and the ways that God's showing up. Because if we're honest, that's not always the case, right? No matter how strong your faith is, sometimes it feels like God's just not even there. And hearing stories from other people really at least helps me when it's not really real to me, right? So hopefully in this series, you can hear some other stories and kind of recognize where God's at work in your life as well. Because sometimes it's super obvious where God's working. You think about in the Old Testament, Moses in the burning bush. Sometimes I wish God would show up in that way to me. But other times it's not so obvious. In fact, for me, I'd say that's probably the norm, that God's not showing up with a big neon sign. And so it makes it so that faith can seem more difficult than non-belief. That life is meaningless. This was all just an accident, and there's no real purpose in life. And so that's why we're doing this. That's why we're sharing these stories, and I hope that it's a series that's really helpful for you in your faith as well, so you can see where God's showing up in your life. And so this clicker's not working, I don't think. Aim it. I gotta aim it. Do you want to click to the next one? I'll just do it that way. So parenting is one of those things that's perhaps taught me more about God, and God's taught me more than anything else. And so these are my 2 boys right here. I don't have 20 kids. These are just 2 of them over and over again. Sometimes it feels like I have 20. They're 6 and almost 4. And that's Cal and Rory. And so one of the things that we're working on with them, if you've ever had a 6 and a 4-year-old before, you probably are recognizing this. Let's see if this works now. Nope, still not working. You want to go to the next one? Is big hurts and little hurts. They are very good at making the littlest things into the biggest thing, right? If you've had kids, or if you don't have kids, you probably understand. Just kids can make things a little bit bigger than they are, whether it's a stub toe. It becomes a little bit of a life and death situation. And so you can go to the next slide now. They've both had a little bit of their share of big hurts. This is my son on the left. He broke his arm about the day before he started kindergarten. And then my other son on the right, that was about 2 years ago, right after he had this pretty violent seizure. And he's all fine now, but we're kind of talking through with them what a big hurt is, what a little hurt is, and kind of matching your reaction, right, to what is actually happening in your life. And so when it comes to, as I think about these big hurts and these little hurts, I've been thinking about this and how it kind of applies to my own life. But one of the biggest hurts that I've witnessed lately, outside of my house, you can go to the next screen, was right here. We got any golf fans? Any golfers? Anyone remember what happened just a couple weeks ago? So my youngest name is Rory. And he wasn't named after Rory McIlroy, but he wasn't not named after Rory McIlroy. We are okay with the reference, or with the connection. If you're not a golfer, not a golf fan, Rory McIlroy you've probably heard the name at least. He was one of the youngest golfers ever to win 4 major championships, other than Tiger Woods and Jack Nicklaus, right? And he's about 35, 36 now, and he hasn't won a major in 10 years. So he's had a lot of build-up, a lot of anticipation for just winning a next one. He's had a lot of expectation. People think he should have been competing with Jack and Tiger for the most all time. And so in this event, these 4 pictures kind of encapsulate the whole event, right? And it really just happened in the last 9 holes of the final day. But the top left is a picture of Rory missing a 3-foot putt on the final hole, and he had missed one 3-foot putt several holes earlier as well. And then the bottom left is him watching as Bryson DeChambeau on the right made an incredible up and down on the last hole to win by 1 shot. So I read that Rory had made 496 consecutive putts of 3 feet or less, and then he missed 2 in the final 3 holes or something to lose this event. And so it was just I just look at this bottom left image and my heart sinks for him, because yeah, he's got a lot of things going for him, but that was a rough event to watch, especially as a Rory fan, and it's probably one of the roughest ones I've ever had to watch. I wasn't really a big golf fan in I think it was '99 when John Van Velde. If you're a golf fan, you're probably familiar with that name. He made a big mess of that tournament as well. But I assume this is fairly similar to that event as well, because it was just a really rough one to watch, and that was a big hurt, at least the way I was viewing it and I anticipated it is for him. But I really liked how he responded. He had just a very brief statement that he put out on social media, and he admitted. He said, "That was brutal. That was gutting. That was the worst loss of my career." And he didn't shy away from the fact that it was a little, I'm sure, embarrassing for him. But I think the response of golf fans is one thing that I found was kind of interesting. Rory's made $125 million in his career. He makes about $10 to $15 million a year. And this question goes around social media every so often is, how much would you need to be paid to quit your job right now to play golf full time? And that number's, it's a lot of times comically low, right? I don't know what my number is, but I have tried, and it's more than $0 a year. So if it's not much, though, I'm sure. But the response of this situation, you see a lot of people saying like, "Oh, he'll be fine. He'll go wipe his tears with $100 bills," right? He's got a lot of things going for him, so he'll be fine because he's a pro athlete. He gets to play golf for a living. He makes millions of dollars, and so we tend to minimize this pain that he's obviously feeling right now. Obviously, it's not life threatening. It's not. He's not in any physical danger, but it is a big hurt right now for him, and he admitted to that. And what I've realized is I kind of do the same thing with my own life. That my kids make this stub toe kind of life or death situation, and I kind of do the opposite thing, where I make big things or even medium things into nothing. And we have this saying that we always, when people ask, how you're doing, you always say, I'm fine. And my dad, when we were growing up, he always used to say, when you'd get hurt, he'd always say, "Well, it's a long way from your heart. Just rub some dirt on it, right? And just go on. You'll be fine." And so I tend to minimize or deny life's hurt because it could always be worse, and we think we shouldn't complain about something because someone else has it so much worse. And I heard someone say recently once, it's kind of a strange saying, but the worst thing that has ever happened to you is the worst thing that's ever happened to you, right? And we want to grade this hurt and this pain and the difficult things in life on a curve, but it's really not a competition. And if we look through the Old Testament, we see specifically David, but all over the Old Testament, a lot of different places where these faithful men are just in pain and agony over whatever situation is they're going through, and they're bringing it to God and saying, I'm struggling with this. And there's a lot of situations, especially in the Psalms, where they start out with this situation where they're really struggling with something, and by the end, God's kind of changed their heart into joy. And I really like how Tim put it earlier, how the mission of Men of Hope is to make sure that every man is filled with hope. And those two stories were kind of encapsulated all of this, and how we can have this hope and have this joy in the midst of difficult situations, and we don't have to deny what's actually going on. And so my big story is where I saw God showing up in my life was happened back in 2008 or 2009. I was living in Omaha at the time, and I was kind of starting my career. At the time, I was starting a career as a golf pro. That's why a lot of my stories revolve around the golf course. And I was living in my own city for the first time and living on my own. And it was at that time that I kind of developed an irregular heartbeat. At first, it was just kind of a little flutter. And over time, over 6 or 8 months, it started to get worse and worse. And I just kind of let this discomfort fester and just not be addressed for a really long time. And eventually, it kind of spun into something really big where it's kind of hard to explain, but my heart really didn't have a rhythm. It didn't have a beat. It would just beat at random times, and I never really knew when my next heartbeat would come, which sounds kind of strange, but at the same time, it felt like I was gasping for breath, pretty much all hours of the day. And so, as this heart condition developed, I was in a job that wasn't really a good situation either, but the anxiety started to grow as well, because every question that I had when my heartbeat wasn't right was, is this going to be my last heartbeat? Okay, and so that all spun out for about 6 or 8 more months as well, where I was having full-blown panic attacks every single day, all hours of the day, as well as my heart rate just it would skyrocket, it would slow down, it would stop, it would skip, it would do all these different things. And so finally, I had a chance to kind of come back home. My parents were living here in Des Moines, and so I had a day off. And so early in the morning, when my panic attacks were at their lowest, I drove back home just to be with my family and just to spend some time with them for a day. And then eventually, after the day, I had to obviously go home, and I had probably the worst panic attack I've ever had on the side of the interstate on the way home. I was probably 30, 45 minutes from Omaha. And had to pull over on the side of the interstate and just let it happen, because there wasn't really anything I could do at the time. And I had been to some doctors at the time, and they told me I was depressed or had panic attacks and that sort of stuff. And I was kind of in denial. It was 2009, so I feel like mental health maybe it was talked about, but maybe not as much. And so I was in denial. I didn't think panic attacks were an actual thing. I didn't think anxiety was a thing. And so I just sat in my car, and I remember I had grown up in the church, and so I would have considered myself religious at the time. And I remember just sitting in my car on the side of the road, on the side of the interstate, and just saying, well, where's God now? If he's real, why isn't he showing up at this moment? And I was angry, and I got more depressed, and I got more anxious. And so finally, I don't know, it was probably it's a 2-hour drive that probably took about 10 hours to get back, because I keep stopping on the side of the road and just like calm myself down for some reason. And when I got back, I had this email. It was from my mom, and she was obviously very concerned about me. And it was just a prayer. She didn't know what else to do. It was just a prayer. And so I read through this prayer, and I don't even know what it said exactly, but I remember reading this prayer and thinking, well, I guess this is my last hope, right? This is all. If this is how I have to go through life every single day, then I just can't do this anymore. And I thought I'd tried everything else, and so that prayer was kind of the beginning of kind of getting back into my faith. And shortly after, I had a friend who invited me to church, and I had said no over and over again, but just felt like maybe I should do it this time. And I don't even remember again what was said in that sermon, what the pastor was talking about, but I remember just feeling this peace. Now, the anxiety and the heart issues and the breathing didn't go away, but I did feel a little bit more peace. So I kept going back, and over time kind of developed this kind of informal small group. And what happened then is where this big issue that I had, this big hurt that I had, I eventually started opening up and revealing this to this informal small group, and they really came around me and showed me Jesus, showed me God in how they were acting and how they came around me at the time. Now, my anxiety and my heart issues didn't go away, at least immediately, but these people acted the way the church is supposed to act, which doesn't sound all that revolutionary, doesn't seem all that incredible, but they showed up. They showed up when I needed them. They brought me things. They were praying for me. They didn't just say, "Hey, I'll be praying for you." They stopped and they prayed for me, and they did these things that the church does, and I started to feel God's presence through these people. And you can go to the next slide now. So there's one of these passages that I really love. It's in Hebrews, and it's this book that's written obviously to the Hebrew people. And in the Old Testament, God often shows up in a cloud. You think about the story of the pillar of cloud that guides Israel. And so in this passage it says, "Therefore, since we're surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith." And so for me, as someone who was just at the time was having these big hurts, and it was very difficult for me to reveal that. I think probably for a lot of guys, it's tough for us to reveal that. But allowing my informal small group at the time to know that allowed them to be the presence of God to me at that time. And so, whereas my tendency in those big hurts, even medium hurts, even small hurts, is to isolate or ignore when things get hard. I had to recognize that when I isolate, God can't speak through the people in my life. And when I ignore it, I don't let those people know that I'm struggling, and they don't have the opportunity to be God to me. They don't have the opportunity to speak God's voice to me. So admitting something is difficult allows God to show up because it lets the church, which is Christ's body, know when they're needed and lets them be what they're called to be. If I was in a small group that I never let know what was going on, I couldn't receive that help that I was needing. And so in my story, over and over again, I see that where God shows up, like I said, is not in this burning bush, is not in this neon sign. It's in the people that have surrounded me, and are allowed to speak God's voice into my life. And so there's this quote from C.S. Lewis in his book called The Problem of Pain, where he talks about painful things and hurts that we have in our life. And he says, "Pain insists upon being attended to. God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our consciences, and shouts in our pains. It's his megaphone to rouse a deaf world." And so in painful moments, a lot of times like the question that I ask myself on the side of the road is, where is God? We often think of when we're struggling with something that God's not actually there. But it's in those moments that he actually a lot of times speaks the loudest if we're listening in the right ways. Now, a lot of you obviously are sitting in small groups right now, so hopefully you've got this sort of the voice of God being spoken into you over and over again through the people around you. But oftentimes, a lot of times, I've been in these small groups, and I think a lot of people have been in these small groups where they just don't know how to speak God's voice into other people, and they use phrases like, "Oh, it'll be okay," or "you should just." My wife says, "Don't should on me," right? You should do this. You should do that. Here's how you should fix it, and things that just aren't helpful. And so, you can go to the next slide here. There's some things that like. A small group that's really speaking God's voice into other people and showing up, I think do these kind of things. This is what I experienced of my small group, and I thought was really helpful compared to some groups that weren't so helpful. The first one is just to listen when someone's saying that they're hurting. Don't try to fix it. Just listen to what it is. The second one is actually pray. That was one big thing that my group did for me when I was at my worst. Is they actually prayed for me. They stopped and prayed for me right then, and they didn't just say, "Oh, I'll pray for you later on," which is good. That's not a bad thing, but they did it for me right there, and that brought me a lot of peace in the midst of a difficult struggle. The next one is just show up and be present. Just being around people who are in difficult situations. I remember that. Then the next one is help carry the burden. In Galatians 6, it talks about carrying each other's burdens. Again, one of the things my small group did was, they'd bring me meals. They'd just show up at my apartment and hang out. They would just do the things that kind of those monotonous things that everyone has to do, and they made it easier for me to handle just everyday life. They didn't fix the situation. They just made my life easier by helping carrying different burdens. And then the bottom one is remind people of God's promises and tell them the good news. This is one that I had a pastor friend of mine in seminary who was going through a difficult situation as well, and he was talking about his small group, and they were struggling to like help him through it, and so he had to kind of pastor them while going through a difficult situation. And I just asked him, like, what is it that you want them to do for you? Because a lot of the things that small groups do when someone's struggling are all well-meaning things, but they're not always helpful, right? And so that's what he was going through. He had these people who were trying to fix and help his situation rather than actually being helpful. And he said, I want them to tell me the good news, right? And if this good news is good, then in any situation it's going to be good. And again, like Tim said earlier, there's these difficult situations, but there was this peace and this joy because they carried the good news with them regardless of their circumstances. And so reminding people of God's promises and the good news in the midst of difficult situations is incredibly helpful. And so that's one thing that also helped me. It helped give me perspective. It helped me remind me and show me God's presence in my life. And so you can go into the next one here too. So the group questions that you can discuss in your groups now, it's just what's been difficult for you lately in life. Maybe you've already shared that with your group before. Maybe it could be big things, it could be small things. We don't have to minimize those things. Again, we're not grading on a curve. So any ways that your group can be speaking life into those situations, allow them to do that. And then where has God been showing up for you? Who in your life needs to be reminded of God's promises and the good news? Maybe there's someone that's not in this room who doesn't have a small group who that is struggling with something and needs this sort of Christ-centered community where they're reminded of God's promises and they're told the good news. And what does it look like to be the good news for others in need? So I'm going to leave you with that and let you discuss those in your group. And I look forward to coming back here again sometime soon. So you have a good discussion and have a good day. Thanks for being here. Thanks for letting me come.